In 1869, the first American college football game took place between Princeton and Rutgers. The game was played under a modification of the rules of the London Football Associations. Princeton's rules, as drawn up in 1867, called for 25 players to a side. The ball was to be kicked or butted with the head. Carrying the ball was forbidden. When the ball was caught in the air or on the first bounce, the catcher was entitled to a free kick. 6 goals were necessary to win the game. The goalposts were 25 feet apart. According to a short clipping from the New York Times on November 9, 1869, the game lasted for 1 hour and Rutgers won 6-4. Insert your joke here about everything going downhill from Rutgers from there. Over the next 20 years, American football would evolve from something akin to mob soccer, and you think about 25 players to a side, to the American football we love today. This video will cover the years from 1869 to around 1890. It is during these years American football established itself as a distinct sport invented in the United States. Before I get to American football, first a brief bit about the origin of rugby. Rugby was invented in 1823. A young man named William Webb Ellis catches a ball, which was allowed, and ran with it, which wasn't allowed. He broke all the rules at the time, and he was playing at the rugby school in Warwickshire, England. It sounds like a goofy origin story. I mean, this one guy catches a ball and runs with it, and everybody's okay with it. I'm sure there were other guys before that did the same thing, but we start with this one, William Webb Ellis, because you have to start somewhere. It's a goofy origin story. That's the one for rugby. It's just like our first intercollegiate football game that resembled like nothing like football as we know today. But you have to start somewhere. Let's move forward to 1870. A year after the first collegiate game of football, Columbia joined Princeton and Rutgers and began to play something close to soccer. The Cornell Football Association was organized. There were a number of colleges playing soccer-ish ball by then, and Yale began playing football as well, kind of. Allison Danzig, in the book The History of American Football, published in 1956, talks about how there was a student at Yale named David Schley Schaff. He had been at the rugby school in England and had played football there, or rugby. Schaff became a leader at Yale, and when they called a meeting of the students on October 31st, 1872, they organized the Yale Football Association and elected Schaff the team president and captain. So what you kind of see is a split between the schools. Yale wants to start playing something close to rugby. The other schools want to continue something that's much more related to soccer. One of those influential soccer schools was Harvard. And in 1874, McGill University out of Montreal, Canada, plays Harvard. They agree to play 2 games, one under Harvard's rules and one under McGill's. McGill was playing rugby. When the games were over, everybody just decided rugby was much more fun, and Harvard went over to play rugby after that. And this is the game that marks a turning point for American football. It is the game that pushes America towards rugby in place of soccer or European football. If you remember the latest Super Bowl, there was an ad with Dave Grohl, the Foo Fighters, and he said, "We should thank Canada for football." This is because of that game in 1874 between McGill and Harvard. So in 1875, there's another game of great importance that's played between Harvard and Yale. And these are the 2 most arguably influential universities in the United States at that time. Harvard is playing rugby, while Yale is still playing something close to soccer. Harvard beats the tar out of Yale, mostly because Yale didn't know what was going on. And the end result is that Yale was won over to rugby. The games were played in 1875, and the next year, 1876, Yale commits to rugby. It's key because there was a young man named Walter Camp at Yale at that time, and he was playing for Yale in 1876. And Walter Camp would later become known as the father of American football. He had an enormous influence over football for the next 4 decades. So by the late 1870s, you've got Yale, Harvard, Princeton, and Columbia are all playing rugby. They are spreading their love for rugby to the other schools around them. But those four are the primary powerhouses of the time. They are the influencers, as we would say now. Also in 1876, there is a meeting with representatives from the schools, and they want to set the rules between them. Previous to this, the rules were typically set by the home team or agreed upon before a game. So they were kind of loose rules, not hard and fast rules. They largely adopt the Rugby Union Code as used in England, but Yale and Walter Camp want 11 players on a side rather than the 15 current at the time. There is also a lot of contention over scoring, and this is confusing. A touchdown in rugby is when you actually touch the ball down in what we would call the end zone. At the time, that resulted in no points. What it did was give you the opportunity to try a kick, and if you made that kick, that was worth points or a score. And it sounds completely weird to us, but it is confusing when you're looking at this stuff, how in the hell it all works together. So Princeton, Harvard, and Columbia formed the first intercollegiate football association in real football. Yale held out for a couple of years because they still wanted to play with 11 men, and they played with those rules with the other schools around them. In 1878, Yale again tries to get the rules changed so that there are 11 players on a side, and they fail. They would fail until 1880. In 1880, they finally succeed because they figure out that they need an extra guy at the meeting for voting purposes. So when it comes time to vote, they win. So there you get 11 players versus 15 on a side. And it's important because you have 22 guys running around on a field instead of 30. And imagine a football with 30 guys running around a field. How would anybody score? I guess that just seems more mob-like. Also in 1880 comes the rule. It is the rule, the one rule that separates American football from rugby. It is the concept of possession. In rugby, play typically begins with a scrum where there are players in a mass and they push back and forth until one of them kick the ball out to their team. Who ends up with the ball largely depends upon chance or who's better at doing the scrumming than the other team. But it's really chance. Nobody knows who's going to get the ball until it comes out of the scrum. So Walter Camp comes up with this rule where a scrimmage takes place when the holder of the ball puts it on the ground before him and puts it in play by kicking the ball or snapping it back with his foot. The man who first receives the ball from the snap back shall be called the quarterback and shall not rush forward with the ball under penalty of foul. So you kind of see the first establishment of our football. In rugby, when a guy gets tackled, he has to give up the ball immediately, and either side can get the ball after that, but they don't stop play and set up like a line of scrimmage like we do in American football. And you'll notice that, from what I've just stated about Walter Camp's rule, instead of being called a center, it's a snapback. And notice that the ball goes to the quarterback, and the quarterback really can't do anything. He can't rush. He normally would just pass the ball off to a halfback. But it's the beginning of American football as we know it, with the idea of possession. So the new rule is accepted unanimously, and that starts American football. And this all sounds well and good, but there are games that are called block games. And one of those, the most famous, is the 1881 championship between Yale and Princeton. The Intercollegiate Association awarded the championship to the team who had won it before in case of a tie. So basically a tie was equivalent to a victory. So Princeton comes into this 81 game, and they're undefeated, and they felt that if they if they didn't lose the game, they would remain undefeated and therefore they'd be able to call themselves champions. So as a result, Princeton spent the entire first half of the game not attempting to score. They literally would start with the ball and they would run scrimmages, which are basically what we call plays, and they would move it backwards in times, and they would actually move it backward into what we call the end zone now. And they'd argued that there was no rule that they had to give it over to the other team, despite what we would call a safety, and therefore they kept the ball and they started over again at the 25. Princeton basically holds the ball the entire first game, therefore blocking Yale from getting the ball. And Yale, seeing this, did the same thing in the second half. They held the ball and they made no attempt to score, and the game ended in a scoreless tie. And it was the most famous block game, and it really made everybody really angry. There were approximately 10 to 15,000 people who came to watch this game. And from the Buffalo Commercial, which was a newspaper at the time, on November 26, 1881, we see this. Hence it came that the immense crowd of spectators who surrounded the field, not far from 10,000, found themselves standing shivering in the November gale, only to see a wrestling match between two college 11s. Now, these people think they're going to come out and watch a football game, and really what they do is they watch this boring, as the guy indicates, a wrestling match. And there are a number of newspaper accounts referring to games like this, and they are called block games, and they really made people angry because nobody did anything. They just didn't, they held on to the ball and they didn't really try to score, and they were boring. And the last thing you want your sport is to be boring, right? From the same article in the Buffalo Commercial, it comes, evidently a new code of rules is required to remediate this monotonous work, a merry, rushing, mauling, and scrimmages in the place of lively kicking and legitimate football played. I'm going to read you another piece, a little bit, a passage from the commercial, the Buffalo Commercial article from 1881. And it's not about the rules or really the game, but it is about fan behavior, and I thought it was interesting to note. So here it goes. 11 young gents came out from under the grandstand with white pants and jackets and blue stockings and caps. Soon after, another 11 zebra-striped young gentlemen came out with an egg-shaped object, which they fondled a few moments, while scientific freshmen and sophomores ran across the field and gave advice to the players. This is one of the features of the game. If the advices of the other students were all followed, the ball would be simultaneously held, passed, kicked, down, touched, and in every case passed over the other's goal in about 3 minutes from the kick-off. One of the drawbacks to this desirable result is that the ball can only be in one place at a time. So basically what he's saying, this is an article from 1881, and it's about how the crowd, the scientific freshmen and sophomores, know what the players are supposed to be doing on the field, so they're screaming instructions at them. Much like we do now. And people will comment that, well, have you coached the game? Have you ever played the game? And then other people will scream, you should have run a screen pass, or you should have gone for two. And note that even in 1881, before the full rules are established to make American football, that this is a feature of the game. I love that line, this is a feature of the game, because it adequately describes what our fan behavior is and how we approach the game as fans. And it's neat to see this in 1881 because I think it's hilarious that, nothing ever changes really. In the same article, the author complains that a new code of rules is required to stop the monotony of the block game. And really a new code of rules is what they got. So the Intercollegiate Association adopted the down and yards to gain rule at the convention in 1882. And the rule states, if in 3 consecutive fares and downs, a team shall not have advanced the ball 5 yards nor lost 10 yards, they shall surrender the ball to their opponents in the spot of the last down. A fare was putting the ball in play from out of bounds. Kind of weird, but here we see the idea of the system of downs and change of possession. And it eliminated the block games so that people wouldn't get angry because they were watching a wrestling match. But the rule not only brought about the modern game that we know, where there is a possession, different than rugby, and a change of possession, and the concept of downs, but it also resulted in the field being marked with yard markers, which were placed every 5 yards, both horizontally and vertically, so that the field looked like a gridiron. Note that the markings were made, they made these markings with lime. I've had lime in my eye before because of an accident. And it is incredibly painful. And I can't imagine what it'd be like to be tackled on one of the yard markers and have the lime come up and get in your eyes, because over prolonged exposure, that could cause blindness and severe issues. But, they played with a different level of abandon than we do now. So the concept of possession, the line of scrimmage, the system of downs all result in strategy. In rugby, well, I'm sure there's a strategy in rugby. I don't know rugby that well. But, with the ball coming out kind of by chance, you really don't get the chance to set up a play, and therefore you don't have the same level of strategy that you do in football, in American football. So strategies involved how many men you put on the line of scrimmage and how many men were kept in the backfield. So keep in mind that the forward pass is still illegal, but you could come up with all sorts of different formations. And the establishment of these rules that I've outlined so far, basically they create the running game and what we now know as the run game. Walter Camp is credited in 1882 with devising the use of signals to call plays. 1883 introduced the numerical scoring system. Points were awarded for goals, which is basically a kick, touchdowns, and safeties. Prior to this, a goal, a kick, was worth more than a touchdown. A goal from the field was better than a touchdown before touchdowns took precedence over a goal from the field. Again, from Allison's Danzig's book, The History of College Football. In the early 80s, the old rugby system scoring was a source of a number of disputes and quarrels. The system was not a numerical one, but balanced one play against the other. Thus, a goal from the field was superior to the touchdown, but 4 touchdowns took precedence over a goal from the field. If the question of victory involved safeties, then the side making 4 safeties less than its opponent won the game. Is that not just horribly confusing? It is horribly confusing, but that's how they did it at the time. They didn't really have points for each of these things. The problem was that there was a lot of arguing about who won the games because there was no set standard for how much each one of these, a safety, a kick, a touchdown, or a goal, was worth. In 1883, the convention passed a rule regarding numerical scoring. A safety was worth 1 point, a touchdown 2 points, a goal from a try or touchdown 4 points, and a goal from the field 5 points. And then in 1884, they changed that again, and a touchdown was counted for 4 points, the goal after the touchdown 2 points, and a safety was 2 points. There are 2 more rules I'm going to cover as I conclude this video. In 1888, the rules changed to allow tackling below the waist and as far down as the knees. Tackling below the waist was forbidden in rugby, and up to this point, it was forbidden in our new American football. So in 1888, the tackling below the waist rule is changed. This changes the strategy on the field to provide better protection for the ball carrier. Previous to this change, the game was kind of wide open. Formations had lines, people on the line of scrimmage stretched across the field with backs as far out to the edges. because rugby is this thing where you get the ball out of the scrum. You basically, your objective is to pass it out to the side of the field where the fleet-footed guys who are the wings, and they can run much faster than everybody else. And your idea is to get the ball out there quickly and they can run down the field and score, whether it's a try or a touchdown or a kick or I don't know. With the tackling below the waist, this changes strategy because now it's much easier to tackle a guy if you can dive at him and stuff like that. It's also more dangerous. So the formations in American football change, so they become much tighter. It was much harder for the backs to get to the outside and gain yardage because they're more easily tackled. So the linemen are brought in and they're closer together, and then the backs are behind them. Also in 1888 is another new rule that allows for blocking in front of a ball carrier. It's originally called interference. It was another huge change in the game. So previously these rules, the game was much more wide open. And with these two rules, the next phase of football will evolve into mass momentum plays, which involve pushing and pulling players and forming a mass behind, in front of a ball carrier with which they hope to gain yardage. So you've had taken a wide open game and you've compressed it, and in the next phase, it's going to become very deadly. And I hope to do more videos coming as we move into the next phase of American football. I hope you enjoyed this video about the foundation of American football and how it began. Please subscribe to our channel. And please give me feedback about anything you'd like to see and any feedback about the video. I am trying to learn more about how to do decent videos, do video editing, and improve my skills with everything else, and how to tell better stories here on YouTube. I kind of like doing the college football history thing, and I think I'll stick with that for a while. So please support us by considering purchasing a t-shirt or a hoodie. I'm going to do a little bit of a bonus piece. It's kind of long. I'm going to read to you and show you a portion of a book called Scientific and Practical Treatise on American Football for Schools and Colleges by Amos Alonzo Stagg and Henry L. Williams. It was published in 1893. The version I'm reading from is revised 1894, and it kind of gives part of it gives a description. It's all about the rules of the game, but part of it gives a description of exactly what football would look at the time. So this is kind of long. This is why I included it at the end. If you stick around for it, thank you. And again, I'd like feedback. In the opening play of the game, having possession of the ball are required by rule to kick the ball at least 10 yards into the opponent's territory. Formally, the game has been opened with a rush play, usually a wedge of some sort, but this is no longer permitted. A long, high kick will now be used. If the ball be kicked so that if it goes out of bounds across either sidelines before one of the opposing players touches it, it must be brought back and kicked off again. If it goes out of bounds in the same way a second time, it must be given up to the opponents, who will then be allowed to kick off. The instant the ball is kicked, the game begins, and each side rushes madly after it and endeavors to secure it. The ball will undoubtedly be first captured by one of the players on the side which has not kicked off, since it will be well within their territory. The player who gets it will then either immediately kick it back or run back with it as far as possible toward the center of the field. If at any time the ball has been so kicked in the air that one of the opponents has an opportunity to catch it, he may do one of several things. Either catch it and run with it, or catch it and kick it back, or catch it and make a fair catch. If the player wishes to make a fair catch, he must raise one hand in the air just before catching the ball, and upon catching it, make a mark with his heel on the ground. When a player so raises his hand, no opponent will be allowed to tackle him or interfere with him. As he is interfered with, the player attempting to make the catch will be given 15 yards. When the runner with the ball is caught or tackled, thrown upon the ground, and there held so that he can advance no further, he calls down, whereupon the ball is dead for the moment and cannot be carried forward or kicked until the center rusher again puts it in play according to rule. No piling upon the man who has the ball after he is called down will be allowed, and a violation of this rule will be punished by a grant of 15 yards to the side having possession of the ball. The two teams will now be seen to form in separate lines called the rush line, facing one another, for as soon as down is called, an imaginary line crossing the field from side to side and passing through the center of the ball immediately comes into existence. Each player must remain on the side of this line toward his own goal until after the ball is put in play, and it is one of the duties of the umpire rigidly to enforce this regulation. Should any player cross this line and fail to return before the ball is snapped back, it constitutes an offside play for which the rules provide a penalty. To again put the ball in play, the center rusher places his hand upon it at the spot where down was called. The rushers then line up opposing one another, the line of attack being drawn closely together for a greater concentration of energy, while the defensive rushers are slightly spread apart to facilitate breaking through the line and stopping the advance when the ball shall be put in play. The captain upon the attacking side then shouts some signal understood only by his men, which indicates the evolution that he wishes his 11 to execute, whereupon the center rusher puts the ball in play by snapping it back, that is, by rolling it back between his legs. Immediately behind the center rusher, the quarterback has taken his stand. He receives the ball as it is snapped back and instantly passes it to one of the halfbacks or man in the line for a run, or to the fullback for a kick down the field. Thereupon, the first scrimmage of the game takes place as the opposing team attempts to break through the line and stop the play. One side is not allowed to retain indefinite possessions of the ball without making gain or loss. The rules provide that if the side having possession of the ball shall fail to make an aggregate gain of 5 yards or a loss of 20 yards in 3 consecutive scrimmages, the ball shall be forfeited to the other side at the spot when it was last down. We see the formation of American football as we know it. We see that the center rusher is going to be called the center. The quarterback term is invented. Note that the center starts the play by rolling it between his legs, or sometimes they kind of kicked it with their heel or something like that. But that was football in around 1893, 1894. Again, thank you for listening, and please give me some feedback.